I consider this disloyal, Rebecca spat, her eyes burning with contempt as she revoked my building access in front of the entire team. 3 years of 14-hour days, missed birthdays, and silent sacrifices meant nothing to her. I stood there, humiliated, as she painted me as a traitor for daring to interview elsewhere after being denied a raise every single year. My colleagues looked away, afraid to meet my eyes. I forced a smile, wished her well, and walked out without a word. What no one knew, not even Rebecca, was that I had been preparing for this exact moment all along. I had never imagined that loyalty could feel like a prison. For more than a decade, I had given everything to the company. Late nights, skipped vacations, birthdays spent under fluorescent lights instead of candle glow. When recruiters reached out to me with tempting offers, I turned them down, telling myself that patience and loyalty would eventually be rewarded. I convinced myself that Rebecca, my boss, would see my devotion and finally recognize the sacrifices I had made. But recognition never came. For 3 straight years, every time I sat in her office during annual reviews, she'd give me the same smile, the same rehearsed line. "Michael, you've been invaluable, but our budget is tight this year. Next cycle, I promise." I swallowed those words like bitter medicine, convincing myself that if I waited just a little longer, the tides would turn. But they never did. At home, the cost of my devotion was more obvious. My wife, Laura, would watch me stumble through the front door at midnight, exhausted, tie loosened, face gray from stress. One evening, she asked softly, "How long are you going to keep believing in them, Michael? When do you start believing in yourself?" Her words hit me harder than any corporate rejection. And then there was Emily, my daughter, who had decorated the kitchen table with balloons and homemade cupcakes for my birthday. She had fallen asleep at the table, her small head resting on her folded arms, waiting for me to come home. I kissed her on the forehead, whispering an apology she could never hear. That night, guilt gnawed at me more than hunger or fatigue. Later, when everyone was asleep, I sat at the dining table with my laptop. I clicked open a folder I had kept hidden for years, a collection of files, spreadsheets, and documents. My eyes scanned the numbers that had haunted me since the day I stumbled across them. Discrepancies in the financial reports, misallocated funds, numbers that didn't add up. I had brought it up once, cautiously, in a meeting. Rebecca had smiled, leaned closer, and whispered in my ear, "For your own good, Michael. Drop it." I did. I buried it, told myself it wasn't my battle. Yet something inside me refused to let go. And so I had been collecting evidence, file after file, year after year. I closed the laptop slowly that night, the glow fading into darkness. My hand lingered on the lid, my heart pounding. Not yet, I thought. Not yet. The cracks began to show at work. My colleagues no longer included me in brainstorming sessions. Meetings would be scheduled without me, decisions made in rooms where my chair sat empty. They called me reliable, dependable, but treated me like a shadow, always present, never acknowledged. I had become the invisible man of the office. The betrayal that cut deepest came from Daniel, the colleague I once considered my closest friend. We had shared late nights, traded jokes over stale pizza while finishing impossible projects. I had confided in him about exploring other opportunities, about my frustration at being passed over year after year. I found out later that Daniel had gone to Rebecca, whispering my doubts into her ear like a snake delivering venom. When I saw them together in the hallway, her hand on his shoulder, her laugh too warm, I knew he had chosen his side. One evening, as I left the office later than everyone else, my phone buzzed. It was my mother, her frail voice shaky yet tender. "Michael," she said, "I don't understand. Why aren't they promoting you? You've worked so hard. Your father would have been so proud to see you succeed." I bit my lip, forcing back the sting in my throat. I had no answer to give her, only silence that carried my shame. I walked through the empty corridors, the fluorescent lights humming above me, and felt the weight of isolation pressing down. Have you ever felt like a pawn on a chessboard, moved around only to protect the king while being sacrificed without thought? That's what I was, a pawn, nothing more. As I approached the exit, I passed Rebecca's office. The door was ajar, light spilling into the hallway. Her voice drifted out, sharp and deliberate. "Yes, he's been a problem for a while. Don't worry, we'll deal with him this week." My feet froze, breath caught in my chest. She wasn't talking about just sidelining me. She was planning to erase me, my name, my career, everything I had built. It was about to be dismantled. For a moment, fear paralyzed me. Then something colder, steadier, settled in my chest. I stepped away quietly, careful not to be seen, my heart drumming like war drums. She thought she had control of the game. She had no idea that the pawn she was about to sacrifice had already made his move long ago. The days that followed were like walking across a frozen lake, each step uncertain, every sound echoing too loudly. Rebecca's words haunted me. "We'll deal with him this week." I replayed them over and over, searching for hidden meanings, but deep down, I already knew. A trap had been set, and I was the target. I began to notice the patterns. Emails I was mysteriously left off of, meetings rescheduled without my knowledge, whispers that died the moment I entered a room. When I confronted Daniel, he shrugged with false innocence, saying, "You must be imagining things, Michael." But the gleam in his eyes betrayed him. This was no accident. Someone wanted me erased. One afternoon, as I walked past the executive suite, I caught sight of Rebecca sitting with two senior board members behind closed glass doors. Their laughter drifted out faintly, but their expressions were sharp, calculating. It struck me then. Rebecca wasn't acting alone. She was only a piece on a larger board, executing orders from higher powers. The realization hit like ice water. My fight wasn't just with her, it was with the system itself. That night, I sat in the garage with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, staring into the shadows. The cold seeped into my bones, but it wasn't the chill that unsettled me. It was the crushing weight of betrayal. Laura came down quietly, saw the glass in my hand, and paused at the doorway. Her eyes searched mine, but she didn't ask. Maybe she was afraid of the answer, or maybe she already knew. She left me there, alone with my thoughts and the hum of the old fridge. On the workbench beside me sat a small USB drive. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers, the weight of it heavier than any weapon. It held fragments of the truth, files, discrepancies, quiet proof of corruption. I whispered to myself, "Not yet." The words tasted bitter, like smoke in the back of my throat. Timing was everything. Move too soon, and I'd be crushed. Wait too long, and they'd bury me before I had the chance. In the following days, Rebecca called me into her office. She leaned back in her chair, voice smooth as velvet, but sharp as glass. "Michael, I've heard rumors. People are saying you're unsettled." If you stay loyal, I can make sure you're protected. But if you keep making waves, I can't guarantee your place here." Her words were poison disguised as kindness. Stay loyal and survive, or resist and lose everything. My hands tightened into fists beneath the desk. My entire career, my family's security, my dignity, they all hung in the balance. I forced myself to nod, to play the role of the obedient soldier. But inside, a different answer burned. I would not bow. That night, I reopened my laptop, but I didn't save anything on the company's servers. Instead, I began building a separate archive, encrypted and hidden far beyond their reach. Every late night report, every buried email, every doctored spreadsheet, I saved it all. Evidence piled up like ammunition waiting to be fired. One Saturday morning, Emily found me at the dining table, eyes bloodshot, coffee cold beside me. She tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Daddy, why do you keep writing all those notes?" I smiled faintly, pulling her onto my lap. "Because the truth matters, sweetheart. And when you tell the truth, you need proof. Always keep proof." She nodded solemnly, as if storing the lesson in her young heart. That moment reminded me of why I couldn't give in. This fight wasn't just about me. It was about the world she would grow up in. Then came the twist I never saw coming. As I walked through the nearly empty office late one evening, I heard the faint click of a hard drive. Following the sound, I found a junior analyst, Claire, hunched over her desk, her screen filled with files strikingly similar to mine. Financial irregularities, hidden transactions, discrepancies buried in footnotes. Our eyes met, wide with recognition. Neither of us spoke at first, but in that silence we understood. We were not alone. She finally whispered, "They think no one notices, but I've been collecting for months." It was as if a hidden door had opened in a prison cell. An unexpected ally stood before me, someone who also saw through the lies. The thought struck me like lightning. Sometimes, the enemy of your enemy is not just an ally, they're your salvation. From that night, our silent pact was sealed. We worked in shadows, careful not to cross paths too obviously, careful not to tip our hand. Every file saved was another stone in the wall we were building against them. But the noose was tightening. One morning, as I walked into the office, my phone buzzed with a message. "Rebecca wants to see you immediately." My pulse quickened, sweat prickling at my collar. Had she discovered me? Had Daniel whispered one secret too many into her ear? I slipped the USB drive into my pocket, straightened my tie, and headed for her office. Rebecca's office felt like a courtroom the moment I stepped inside. A long mahogany table separated me from her and two senior executives, their expressions carved from stone. A folder lay open before them, filled with papers I had never seen, yet every line bore my name. Rebecca's voice sliced through the silence. "Michael Turner, you violated confidentiality and betrayed this company. You've been disloyal, sharing sensitive information with outside recruiters. You're finished here." My stomach churned as she slid one of the documents toward me. It was a fabricated email chain, one that appeared to show me leaking internal data. The signatures, the timestamps, they had forged everything. I knew it, but how could I prove it in that moment? One by one, the executives piled on, their words rehearsed. "This is grounds for termination. You could face legal action if we pursue this." The walls closed in, the air thick with accusation. They weren't just firing me, they were burying me alive. And then, from the back of the room, A voice I never expected spoke up. Claire, the junior analyst, the one who had always avoided eye contact with me, the one who seemed irritated whenever I spoke in meetings, suddenly stepped forward. "With respect," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "these documents don't add up. Look at the metadata. It doesn't match his work history. I checked. This isn't Michael's doing." Rebecca's eyes flared with rage. "You're out of line, Claire." But the damage was done. For the first time, doubt rippled through the room. The executives glanced at one another, uncertainty flashing across their carefully masked faces. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her smile turning venomous. "Don't flatter yourself, Michael. You're not important. You're a pawn, expendable, replaceable. The system doesn't stop for people like you." Her words should have crushed me. Instead, they ignited something inside. I looked her dead in the eye and said, calm and steady, "I've been preparing for this day for a very long time." The room fell silent. A microsecond of unease flickered in their eyes. Did they wonder what I meant? Or was it simply the confidence in my voice that unsettled them? Then came the choice. One of the executives slid a document across the table, a settlement agreement. "Sign this, admit guilt, and you'll be spared public disgrace. Walk away quietly." My pulse hammered in my ears. If I signed, I'd keep my reputation clean in the short term, but I'd be branded as guilty forever. If I refused, they would smear my name, drag me through the mud, destroy everything I'd worked for. The pen hovered above the paper, my hand trembling. The room blurred for a moment, and I saw Emily's face, her small voice asking why her father was never there. I saw Laura's tired eyes, silently begging me to stand for something more than survival. I set the pen down. "I won't sign," I said. Rebecca's smile returned, sharp as a knife. "Then you'll regret it." I walked out of that office, stripped of my badge, my dignity battered, but my resolve burning stronger than ever. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was waiting. 3 days later, the storm broke. At 9:30 a.m., sharp, the inboxes of shareholders, auditors, and even federal regulators lit up simultaneously. The subject line was simple: truth inside these walls. Attached were files, hundreds of them, detailing financial manipulation, off-the-books transfers, and hidden losses Rebecca and her circle had orchestrated over the past 3 years. The numbers were undeniable. The evidence, irrefutable. Rebecca stormed into the building, her phone pressed to her ear, shouting orders to IT, demanding to know who had sent the leak. But this wasn't coming from my computer. The source was traced to a secure server outside company walls, a machine I had set up long ago as a failsafe. My insurance policy had finally come alive. Panic spread like wildfire. Calls poured in from investors demanding answers. The board convened an emergency meeting. Reporters gathered outside the gates, cameras ready. Meanwhile, I was at home. Emily curled into my arms as I kissed the top of her head. "Daddy, are you staying home now?" she asked. I held her tighter, the weight of years of absence pressing down on me. "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy's going to be here a lot more." For the first time in years, I felt free. Not victorious yet, but free. The phone rang just past midnight. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Rebecca's voice was raw, stripped of its venom. "Michael, we need to talk." Her words echoed in the silence of my living room, and for the first time, it was her voice, not mine, that trembled with fear. The story hit the news like a thunderclap. Within hours of the emails being released, headlines splashed across every major network. tech giant accused of financial fraud. Anchors dissected the details. Analysts speculated on the scale, and stock tickers bled red on the screen. What had once been a fortress of untouchable prestige now looked like a crumbling castle under siege. Rebecca's voice from the night before still echoed in my ears, but I hadn't returned her call. There was no need. The storm had already been unleashed, and it was bigger than her. The following morning, as I sipped coffee at my kitchen table, Laura set down her mug with trembling hands. "Michael, this is everywhere. Are you sure they won't come after you for this?" Her eyes were filled with fear, not for herself, but for me and Emily. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand. I was careful. They don't know it was me. And even if they did, the truth is on our side. But even as I said the words, a gnawing unease crept into my chest, because the truth was no longer mine alone. 2 days after the leak, a new wave of documents appeared online. Contracts, payment records, offshore accounts. This wasn't from my server. Someone else had joined the game, and they had even more damning information. Rebecca and her allies weren't just dealing with my quiet rebellion anymore. They were being hunted from multiple directions, and I had no idea who else was pulling strings. The weight of it all pressed on me as I walked to the mailbox that afternoon. Inside was a small brown package with no return address. I brought it into the garage, sliced the tape open, and froze. Inside was a copy of a contract I had never seen, an agreement between the company and a shell corporation overseas. The signature at the bottom belonged to a man I had once respected deeply, a senior shareholder who had mentored me in my early years. My throat went dry. Whoever had sent this wanted me to know the rot went higher, deeper than I had dared imagine. That night, Laura found me staring at the papers under the dim garage light. "Michael, promise me they won't try to hurt you. This isn't just corporate politics anymore." I tried to smile, but it faltered. "I'll be careful," I said, though even I wasn't sure I believed it. On the third morning, the real collapse began. Police cars pulled up to the corporate headquarters. News cameras swarmed the streets as investigators in suits marched through the glass doors. The building that had once stood as a monument to ambition now looked like a crime scene. Employees were escorted out, files carried away in boxes. Watching it unfold live on television was surreal. The empire I had built my career on was collapsing like dominoes, each tile knocking the next in an unstoppable chain. Rebecca's name flashed across the screen as reports confirmed multiple arrests. Yet even as I saw her led away in handcuffs, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the real target. She had been ruthless, yes, but someone had been pulling her strings. The following week confirmed my suspicions. More executives were arrested, their names added to the endless crawl of scandals. Yet the most shocking twist came late one night as I scrolled through an investigative article. Rebecca wasn't the mastermind. She was a pawn. The true orchestrator was none other than Harold Whitman, a senior shareholder, a man I had admired, even trusted. He had once advised me over coffee, telling me, "Always be patient, Michael. The company rewards loyalty." Those words, which I had clung to for years, now rang hollow. He had been feeding the very corruption that bled us dry. The betrayal cut deeper than Rebecca's ever could. She was ambitious, cruel, but Harold, he had played the role of mentor, all the while tightening the noose. The next morning, as I tried to process it all, Emily tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, why are they talking about your company on TV? Did you do something wrong? Her innocent eyes searched mine for reassurance. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. No, sweetheart. I tried to do what's right. Sometimes, when people do bad things, the truth has to come out. That's what you're seeing. She nodded, but her frown lingered. The simplicity of her question burned into me. How do you explain betrayal on such a massive scale to a child? How do you tell her the people she thinks of as leaders are the very ones poisoning the well? Later that evening, just as the house settled into quiet, a knock rattled the front door. Laura peeked through the curtain and gasped. Standing on the porch, pale and disheveled, was Rebecca. Gone was the polished mask of control. Her eyes darted around, desperate, haunted. I opened the door slowly, meeting her gaze. For the first time since I had known her, she looked afraid. Rebecca stood on my porch like a ghost stripped of her power. Rain slicked her hair against her face, her suit wrinkled, her eyes darting as though shadows themselves hunted her. For a long moment we just stared, the silence between us filled with years of venom and betrayal. Finally, she spoke. Michael, please, I need to explain. I should have slammed the door in her face. I should have left her to drown in the storm she had unleashed. But something in her eyes, raw desperation, made me step aside. Laura's worried gaze followed me as Rebecca slipped inside, her heels leaving wet prints on the hardwood floor. We sat at the kitchen table. She didn't touch the cup of tea Laura set down for her. Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder thick with documents. She slid it across the table toward me. I never wanted to destroy you, she whispered. Her voice cracked. They forced me. I was told to cut you loose, or they'd cut me instead. I opened the folder. Bank records, wire transfers, offshore accounts. It was all there, but not just fraud. It was bigger, darker. Money laundering, ties to organized crime, payments routed through shell companies across multiple countries. This isn't just about financial manipulation, Rebecca said, her words rushing out like a confession she'd held for too long. This company has been used to wash billions in dirty money. I followed orders, Michael. If I didn't, they would have ruined me the way they're trying to ruin you. Anger flared hot in my chest, but alongside it was something colder, pity. She looked smaller, broken, a woman who had traded her soul for survival and was left with nothing. You betrayed me, I said, my voice low but sharp. You chose your career over my life. Her lips trembled. I chose my survival. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're different. They'll come for you too. And if you refuse to help me, your wife, your daughter, they'll be next. The threat wasn't screamed, but whispered, and that made it worse. Laura froze in the hallway, hearing enough to turn pale. I clenched my fists under the table, fury clawing at me, but I couldn't dismiss the truth behind her words. For a long moment, I said nothing, staring at the folder between us. I was caught between two impossible paths. Join forces with the woman who had betrayed me to fight against a monster larger than either of us, or refuse and risk dragging my family into the fire. Rebecca leaned closer, her eyes pleading. You don't have to like me, Michael, but you know I'm right. Her words lingered long after she left that night. Days later, I discovered something that shifted the ground beneath my feet. As I combed through encrypted forms and anonymous email threads, I stumbled upon messages that matched the style of my own hidden files. Code phrases, attachments, leaks. It wasn't just me. There were others. I reached out cautiously, and one by one, the replies came. Former employees, analysts, even a manager or two, people who had been cast out, silenced, betrayed by the same corrupt system. Together, they had been gathering evidence just like I had, waiting for the moment to strike. That was when I realized the biggest twist of all. The email that had detonated the scandal hadn't come from me alone. My fail-safe system had been one trigger, but others had pulled theirs too. It was a collective act, a coordinated rebellion born of years of injustice. And then came the revelation that floored me. Among the anonymous names was one I recognized from whispers long past, a former director, a man who had vanished suddenly years ago after crossing paths with Rebecca. I had assumed he'd been destroyed, erased. But here he was, alive in the shadows, fighting the same battle. I felt a strange rush of both dread and relief. I wasn't alone anymore. I never had been. That night, Emily curled beside me on the couch as we watched the news. She pointed at the screen, confusion clouding her young face. "Daddy, why are so many people angry at your company?" I pulled her closer, brushing her hair back. "Because, sweetheart, sometimes people in power do bad things, and sometimes it takes a group of us to stand together before the truth comes out. Justice isn't just one person, it's all of us." Her small hand rested on mine, as if she understood more than I gave her credit for. But the truth weighed heavy. The files we had, the evidence we now shared, could burn down more than just one company. It could take down partners, clients, entire industries. Innocent people would lose their jobs, their livelihoods. Was it worth the collateral damage to bring the giants to their knees? I stared at the glowing screen, the folder of documents spread across my desk, the encrypted chat messages waiting for my reply. The decision pressed against me like a blade at my throat. Expose everything and ignite a firestorm that would change the industry forever, or hold back and let the rot continue to fester unseen. The world would never be the same either way. When the dust finally settled, the company that had once defined my career lay in ruins. Executives were dragged into courtrooms. Shareholders faced indictments, and the empire that had stood so tall crumbled into rubble. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt most was exhaustion, a hollow ache that came after years of carrying a weight too heavy. It was during that fragile time that an unexpected opportunity arrived. A small startup, only a few years old, reached out to me with an offer. At first, I hesitated, fearing another trap, another cycle of empty promises. But when I sat down with their founders, something felt different. They weren't chasing greed or power. They were building transparency into the bones of their company. The real twist came when I learned who they were. 3 of the founders had once worked at my old firm, victims of the same injustice that had nearly crushed me. They had walked away years ago, choosing to start fresh rather than rot in corruption. Now, they wanted me to join them, not just as an employee, but as someone who could help steer the culture away from the poison we had all endured. I accepted. The change in my life was immediate and profound. No more 12-hour nights spent chained to spreadsheets no one would credit me for. No more groveling for raises that never came. For the first time in years, I was free to breathe. One crisp morning, I walked Emily to school. She chattered about her favorite book, her small hand gripping mine. I realized then it was the first time in years I had done this. Walked her to class, kissed her cheek at the gate, and promised I'd be there when the bell rang. As I watched her run inside, laughing with her friends, a quiet question surfaced in my mind. If you were me, would you choose peace and family now, or keep fighting for justice in a world that still needs it? I didn't yet have the answer. That evening, as I sorted through emails at my new desk, one subject line froze me cold. Confidential, internal concern. It wasn't from my new colleagues, but from someone inside another corporation. The message hinted at the same rot I had just escaped. A new scandal brewing, another company devouring itself with greed. The war, it seemed, was never over. Meanwhile, the downfall of my old company deepened. What was once a titan of industry was dismantled piece by piece, its name becoming a curse whispered in business schools as a warning. Harold Whitman, the mentor I had once trusted, was exposed as the true puppeteer. His arrest sent shockwaves across the market. Watching him, led away in handcuffs, was surreal. The betrayal had been complete, but so had justice. And then there was Rebecca. To my astonishment, she did not vanish into disgrace. Instead, she re-emerged months later, not as an executive, but as a volunteer at a nonprofit dedicated to protecting whistleblowers. Seeing her standing behind a podium, speaking about redemption and accountability, I felt something I hadn't expected: respect. She had been my enemy, yes, but now she was using her survival to protect others. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once tried to bury me was now helping others rise. Perhaps even the worst of us could change. Life at home transformed as well. On Emily's birthday, I was there from the moment she woke until she blew out the candles. No late-night emails, no excuses. Her eyes sparkled as she whispered, "This was the best birthday, Daddy." That simple sentence meant more to me than any title I had ever held. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, in moments of presence, in promises kept. It may arrive late, but it always arrives. As night settled, I stood by Emily's bed, watching her breathe softly in her sleep. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "I kept my promise." And for the first time in years, I believed it.